The tension felt across the globe. The Cold War constantly threatened the end of the world as we knew it. 35 years later, hear the stories from the men and women of the US Nuclear Triad, the human beings behind deploying the instruments of destruction. What lessons need to be remembered today, and did the Cold War ever really end? You're listening to Edge of Deterrence.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Edge of Deterrence. My name is Andrew Cruz, your host. With us, we have co-host Colonel Ed Rios. Ed spent 26 years in the U.S. Air Force operating across air, space, cyber, and special technical operations. He has had several commands and 3 combat deployments. Ed has a background in engineering, holds a patent for high-altitude, long-endurance aircraft. He was the first CEO of the National Cybersecurity Center and sits on the board of many defense contractors and consulting groups. But our main special guest today is retired 4-star General Lance Lord. Lance's long list of accomplishments include Director of the Ground Launch Cruise Missile Program from 1985 to 1987, U.S. Air Force Headquarters in Europe, Ramstein, Germany, and after commanding several more missile and space wings, became a commander of Air Force Space Command in Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado in 2002. Now, Lance and Ed actually worked together during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Ed was under Lance as a director of current operations for Air Force Space Command and commander of Space Operations Squadron for the headquarters Air Force Space Command. A lot of I understand why you guys use acronyms now. That's a long list of accomplishments, quite a mouthful, but so can you tell me how you guys worked together and met in the Air Force?
Ed, why don't you start with that, and I'll fill in around, because our backgrounds are a little bit different to start with. Not totally, but a little bit. And then we got together in great fashion. So it'd be good to get your perspective.
I had, I think, 3 memorable first meetings with General Lord. The first one was in Europe when he was working at headquarters, United States Air Forces Europe, USAPI. I believe that's correct where you were there, Lance. And was running the Ground Launch Cruise Missile Program there. And we had several problems with that system. I was one of the cadre members of that weapon system. And one of them was a very significant audible and infrared signature that we wanted to get rid of. So we created a way to do that we called Run Silent. And it was just, a few of us guys who came up with a way to continue the nuclear surety, the operation capability of the mission in terms of viability of execution, and then the ability to stay hidden in our deployed configuration. We went to brief that to General Lord, and that was the first time when I met him and others, because it was quite a crazy idea and went through several evolutions. We finally got to the right answer. So I don't know if you recall that point of view or not, Lance, but any thoughts on that one?
No, I know that was an important aspect for us because, it was an important weapon system, certainly in the United States Air Forces in Europe. And really to have the operational feedback we needed from the field to the headquarters, because my job was I was the head of the bed down, the bases and units, and getting all the people and the equipment and everything together in an integrated fashion to create the capability. And what we needed was real operational experiences. And I know you went through the director of operations and the rest of the folks on the staff, but it was up to us to really, as a team, to decide this is something we want to implement and make sure that the day-to-day operations are consistent with what we need to provide the capability in Europe.
At that time, I think I was a colonel. I was a captain, and you were a lieutenant colonel. Is that right, Carol?
No, when I was a colonel, I'd been in the. Okay. That's an interesting story we can talk about. When it gets to, we talked a little bit about getting in place in Europe, which is pretty interesting in and of itself. So that was good. Yeah. I was a colonel at the time. I actually was I was a frock colonel. I mean, I was on the list to be promoted to colonel, but when I went into theater, I was requested the Chief of Staff of the Air Force to give a waiver so that I could put on the Colonel's Eagles. And when I actually arrived at Ramstein to be in the headquarters of the United States Air Forces Europe, I actually put the eagles on my shoulders, epaulets on in the restroom in the airport. So I I went in as a lieutenant colonel, popped out as a colonel. I got a latrine promotion to full colonel. But I had to arrive in theater and certainly at Ramstein as a colonel, and then my number caught up with me, and so I was on the promotion list.
The second time I met Gerald Lord, we had some passings along the way, but I was much junior in rank, so it didn't consist of much other than howdy. I remember you. Keep doing what you're doing. I had just finished briefing him in a very classified setting. We have these sensitive compartmentalized information facilities for top secret and above systems. And within that, there's even another classified area. And I was briefing out the space and special technical operations package of a war plan called 1003 Victor. It was the war plan that we were going to be implementing at the time. Because the 4-star general was there, everybody else was in there. So it's a very crowded, very small room. Done. Everyone stands up at attention, of course, as I do. General Lord is much taller than I am. And as he's squeezing by, he looks down at me and he says, Bull, you still ride motorcycles? And I said, yes, sir. And that's all he said. And he just kept on going. And a night or two later, I got a call from his vice commander, Major General Bob Henson. He says, hey, you've been selected for command. You need to come to Colorado Springs if you want to take it. Do you want it? And I said, yeah, of course, sure. When do I need to be there? And he said, Monday morning. So I got on an airplane and took off that Thursday night, got there Sunday, and reported to duty for General Lord that morning. I can't remember exact date, but yeah.
That was consistent with how I came into theater, because I was hired by the 1-star planner, Brigadier General Chuck Boyd, who I had known before when I was a commandant of some other work for him. And he said, I want a missile guy out of the ICBM business who understands operations and how important it is to get things together and get the operational flavor into the bed down for the ground launch cruise missile. And, that was important to get that kind of flavor. And that's reflected through our experiences together to really put the operations, day-to-day operations into the right kind of framework for not only to operate the system, but to prove to our enemy, in that case, our potential enemy, was the Russian development of the SS-20 and the capabilities that they brought into theater. And that's why we did the intermediate range nuclear forces deployed in Europe, was to counter the SS-20 and the growing threat from Russia to NATO and the NATO area. And you had to have day-to-day operational credibility to really prove that you could do what you said you're going to do. And that has always been the essence of deterrence. So that's why it's important to have not only the capability, but as General Doherty used to say, not only do you have to have the capability, you have to have the will backed up by the operational experience to be able to make a valid, credible deterrence out of your capability. And that means people like Ed and those that worked with us to put the day-to-day people together and the operational environment, as well as the maintainers and everybody that created the capability. So it takes good people to do that, and Ed was one of the best ever to help shape that.
Thank you, Daryl.
And no one can refute that.
So I guess we'll move on to the early Cold War. So General, where did you grow up, and what was your perception of the Cold War as a kid, or your family's perception of it?
Very, very good. I mean, this is, I kind of like talking a little bit about this, but, as born in 1946 is the leading edge of the baby boom, post-World War II. My father was involved in D-Day invasion. He was in the United States Army and the Second Army, and met my mom, who was a clerk typist at Smyrna Army Airfield right outside of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Second Army went in maneuvers in Middle Tennessee in before D-Day to simulate what the conditions were going to be like when they landed in terms of the geography and the capability and what it was like. So they did their maneuvers there, and my dad met my mom there. And then after D-Day and being involved in that, he was involved in the like he was over the beach at H plus 12 hours and involved with, he was one of the signal, he was in the signal corps, one of the signal lieutenants for General Omar Bradley, the 3-star. That was one of Ike Eisenhower's principal generals involved in the D-Day operations. But anyway, long story short, he came back to the U.S. after that, married married my mom, and in 1945, I was born in 46, and ended up in he and his brother were in the bottling business, Canada Dry bottling business, ginger ale and Canada Dry products, in Wheeling, West Virginia. So I was born in Philadelphia, quick trip to Wheeling, West Virginia, and then ended up in my brother, my uncle, and my dad. They separated. My dad went in the insurance business. My uncle stayed in the bottling business, and he moved to New York. We moved to Ohio, and I went to elementary school in Youngstown, Ohio. I went to school there. So I remember the early days of the Cold War as a student. I was in the first grade in 1952 and going on air raid drills and going down the hall and getting under our desks to practice civil defense to be prepared for if there were an attack on the United States.
Duck and cover, yeah.
Yeah, duck and cover way back then, So,
when you were growing up, did you always want to be in the military? Was that because your father was involved in that? Was that something you always wanted to do, or did you want to do something completely different?
yeah, I imprinted on my dad, that's for sure. He came out of the Army, active Army, and then went in the reserves, and he was in the reserve units, and he put on his uniform once a week, and I kind of imprinted on that. And long story short, I went to a military high school in the town my mom was from in Tennessee, and
A military high school?
a military house called Castle Heights Military Academy. So I was in uniform from the time I was a freshman in high school all the way through my service in ROTC in college, as well as all my 37 plus years in the Air Force. So I guess I'd say 37 plus 4, 41, maybe 45 years in uniform.
Wow.
So it was always something that. But my dad, being the great Army guy he was, he told me, he says, "Lance, don't go in the Army, go in the Air Force." That's what I did.
Smart man, right? So, what was your perception of the Cold War once you got into high school? Did you have any perception of the Soviet?
Not really focused on in high school. Although I was, in uniform and part of, Sunday parades and dress whites and doing all that stuff that you do at a military school, and doing junior ROTC, so to speak, and had an honor school. It was an honor school because of its standing among other military academies, and had a appointment to West Point. Although I couldn't pass the physical because of my eyes, I was hopelessly nearsighted and couldn't pass a physical for West Point. Had an appointment, or I was going to go to Vanderbilt University to be a naval ROTC. Couldn't get into the Navy ROTC because of the same medical situation. And the Air Force was the only service that would waive my vision. So I went in ROTC in college. I had a ROTC boss that was really gung ho, and one of his captains, a guy named Captain Ed Hammer. When it came time to pick what you were going to do in the Air Force when you went on active duty, right before you graduated, about a year before you graduated from college, he looked at me and he says, "I know you wanted to fly, but you can't fly because of your vision. We let you in on the Air Force let you in." And he says, "You should go into operations. Go into operations. Always make your first job an operational job." So he said, "The ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Mission, is starting, and they want people to join and be part of that. And the new base in North Dakota, Grand Forks Air Force Base, is just activating its wing. That'd be a great place for you to go. So I said, put me in, coach. And I ended up at Grand Forks in well, Becky and I got married in 1968, and we got to Grand Forks, and after going through Vandenberg, or going through Chanute and Rantoul, Illinois, and going through weapon system familiarization, and then going through the Strategic Air Command emergency warrior training at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. And then we ended up in Grand Forks, North Dakota in April of 1969. And that was my operational assignment for 4 years.
So did you go to college while you were doing this, or college was before you headed off to the silos?
Yeah, it was between high school and I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in December of 1968. In fact, my dad gave me the oath of commissioning in December the 4th, 1968. And I graduated from college that same day. My wife is smarter than me. She graduated 6 months earlier, which is always good to recognize. Becky Lord and I have been together ever since. Almost 57 years.
It's incredible.
So anyway, that was it. College, ROTC, and my military background from military high school really helped me in ROTC and being able to, but I had a couple places where, people said, you can't do this, you can't do that. And the oh yeah factor always helped me. I said, oh yeah, I'll show you I can do that. So that's important. You got to have a little bit of that in your, that's something my grandfather taught me. Always do more than people ask you to do, and you'll always be rewarded.
Well, I think
I think that's what we did, right, Ed? We always
100%.
did.
Yes, sir.
Always did more. Always did.
Well, I guess that motto worked pretty well for your career. So you ended up right out of well prepared for military life, and you ended up working in an ICBM silo. What was that like, being in a silo? Were you there all the time? Were you doing long 12-hour shifts? What was it like? Was it boring? Was it nerve-wracking?
Yeah, all those things.
All of them. Yes.
No, actually, the alert schedule for an operator, because you start out as a deputy missile combat crew commander, and then after you spend a couple years, you become a combat crew commander. But as a deputy assigned with my first crew commander came out of the B-47 Navigator business when they started phasing down the B-47 bomber tankers and that part of Strategic Air Command. And I got to really understand the rigors of being an operator from Ed Avent, who was my first crew commander years and years ago back then. And it was an alert schedule where you pulled back then, 40-hour alerts per month, which were actually on site. You drive out to the site and the vehicle will go on site. It'd spend eight hours downstairs in the launch control center, then 8 hours up and rest, 8 hours down, 8 more rest, and then 8 hours down, and then you go home and be relieved by the next crew coming out. They adjusted that schedule nowadays, and it's different than it was back then, but that's the way it was set up. So in the launch control center, inspect the equipment, make sure everything's good, control maintenance going in and out, because in those days, in the Minuteman system especially, one launch control center was responsible primarily for 10 ICBMs, 10 Minuteman missiles, and you were electronically connected to those 10. You were part of a squadron. There were 50 missiles in a squadron, and 5 launch control centers, each controlling 10, but you could take responsibility for another launch control center's missiles if they had to go down for maintenance or whatever. But the system was really backed up and double checked, and had the capability to run independently or together corporately for that. Now, day-to-day activities, maintenance on site, stuff like that worked really well. There were times when if nothing happened, that was, some would say boring, but it was up to the individual crew to take care of business there. So
somewhere along the way, Andrew, it shifted. I'm not sure where or when. I was stationed in Minot, so General Lord's next door neighbor there in North Dakota. And we ran 7 shifts a month, 7 alerts. And they were 24-hour alerts, which, transit out and back by vehicle or helicopter, ends up to be quite a bit longer than 24 hours. But we did 7 of those a month.
yeah, ours was 40 hours for changeover, which was different, but that was done by wing to wing, depending, but as long as the launch control center was covered, because you had what's known as the two-man policy for nuclear surety, that you always had 2 people, available always to be able to take care of business, to make sure that they checked each other, and that was backed up by a system called the Personnel Reliability Program, PRP, to make sure that if anything untoward happened to you, or if you had a death in the family, or you mentally were unable to do the job, that you would be removed from the alert schedule, and someone to replace you until you were proven to be recertified back under the PRP program, which was another way to make sure that the right people with the right mind were in the business. When I was a young crew member, probably 1971, there was a thing called the Concerned Officers Movement, that some decided that they may not be able to do that duty, and kind of talk to each other, and it was kind of a little system that came up, and those folks were removed from the business, because you had to certify that, if required, you would do that job necessary to launch your missiles if you're instructed by the president.
So, General, when I came through Vandenberg, part of the training evolution was an interview process, like a psych eval kind of thing. I'm not sure really the career line of the person who did it, but the flight surgeon was there also. Is that something that you had as well?
It was not as how should I say this? It wasn't as uh, you know process oriented as yours was. It was the same system. It was just a little bit different in terms of how it was implemented to begin with, because there were learning steps in this process as we came through, and that's how we improved the business, to make sure that those things were taken care of, because we all had to consult the flight surgeon and others to make sure if there were death in the family, or something happened, or your wife was going to have a baby or something, and you needed some time, or you were on medication. There are certain medications that you could not take and still perform alert duties, because your reliability may be in question. So it's a serious business, and to make Strategic Air Command what it was, the standards were high, and day to day you had practice messages you had to receive, you had to do tests, you had to do decodes, you had to do things that were required to make sure that you were at the top of your game.
At constant evaluations on the weapon system, academics, basics, math, for calculations, simulator rides, no notice evaluation simulator rides. I mean, it was very, very, very grueling and arduous. And really, I think that General would agree, a passing score on a scale of 0 to 100 is 93. Everybody strove to get higher and to get 100%. But if you were under 90%, you were off alert and back in remedial training. If you busted a simulator ride or an evaluation, you're off alert and back in remedial training.
Yeah,
it was very rigorous.
Yeah, you had which was interesting, because you were tested in the simulator and what they call the missile procedures trainer, as well as also the on site. You would be evaluated when you were in part of your day-to-day operations business, because a check to be certified for what we call the standardization evaluation, to make sure that you were up to your required learning and capability day-to-day operationally, is you would be checked in the missile procedures trainer as well as in the field to do your day-to-day activities. So the evaluation team would actually come on site and be certified into the Launch Control Center, and would evaluate you doing your day-to-day duties. And those two, combined with the simulator results as well as the day-to-day in the field, constituted your evaluation. And You always wanted to be highly qualified if possible. But you had a qualified and highly qualified. If you were, say you're in the field and you did something that would unqualify you, they would call back to the base and someone would come out and replace you on duty. And the evaluator would stay there with you until you were relieved and the new individual came on duty. So it's
So,
pretty stringent
yeah,
standards, as you would expect.
high stakes, high standards. It makes sense. That kind of leads into the next question I have for you. So, General, you got up every single morning, coffee in hand, with nuclear war on your mind. How did you deal with stress? How did others around you deal with stress? Did you see anybody break from the stress? Um, and the idea that if you had to go through and actually launch, the implications of that, how did you clear that out of your mind? How did you deal with it?
Well, I think it was just a normal, for me, it may have been different for others, and Ed can certainly opine on this, was that was just part of the duty. I said I would do this,
Mhm.
and I signed the paper that said I would do that, and I would have to, if that's what was required of me, and certainly because of whatever the national command authorities and the president of the United States and directed the execution of our mission, I was prepared to do that. I never thought about. I mean, I did in terms of the broad aspects of it in terms of what could happen, but that didn't bother me from sticking my nose in there and said, okay, I'm going to do my job. And if that's what is required, because I think that's the essence of deterrence is the people capability. If you have to do that job, it'll be, we'll deal with that if you ever have to. But, I didn't worry about it personally. I don't know about you, Ed, but I didn't.
I totally agree, General. It was you train so intensely and so constantly that stress becomes actually the new normal for you, and you perform your job at the top of your game every day, every minute that you have the opportunity to perform a task. When you live that way, it becomes your duty. It becomes your job. You signed up for it. It just happens. There's not time to philosophize or think about what you're doing. You know what needs to be done, like any other soldier or military member. You do what you got to do, and that's kind of where we were. We didn't spend time pondering about the grand scheme of deterrence.
Yeah, I don't want to pontificate on this, but I think it's a very important point nowadays, especially, is because it's not about the dying; it's about who gets to do the killing. And you want the professionals that are part of the profession of arms that understand the laws of armed conflict, understand proportionality, understand the duty not to kill non-combatants, to do what's right to achieve the objectives with the minimum amount of damage, etc. You want people that are really skilled in the profession of arms. That's what's important to understand the
Mhm.
ethos of the business. And that's what it means to be a professional in the profession of arms. And it's not, to me, that's a duty you can't take very lightly. That separates you and us and Ed and I and others like us from, it's different from an occupation 8 to 5. It really is. It's a profession. You're on duty 24/7, 365. You might be on leave, but you're still part of the profession. And, you got to adhere to those standards. And I think that, those kind of parameters and that kind of ethos needs to be continually be enforced as what it means to be a member of the profession of arms.
So not just a profession, but a way of life. So following up on that, a lot of people nowadays that didn't grow up during the Cold War don't feel that pressure, don't feel that specter of nuclear war like people did during the Cold War. There's no duck and cover drills in schools. One question I had is about volcanic winter. I don't know if either of you during your time with the Air Force did the Pentagon do studies on the what would be the effect of a nuclear exchange during the Cold War? Um, One thing we have is in the year 537, there was a massive volcanic eruption in San Salvador at Lake Iopango, and this eruption caused a volcanic winter. And we have some first-hand accounts from the Roman Empire and how the sun all year never really shone with brightness. And that was even without the radiation. And a third of humanity perished during the plague, agriculture, famine, horrible, horrible things. Did you have any concept back then, or did you gain any concept of volcanic or not nuclear winter? And is that something that people should keep in mind? That's what would happen, or
I think that's an important question to ask, and how not directly, but how I dealt with that was that I assumed if I did my job and with the weapon system I was part of, and I made sure that it was ready to go when it needed to go, it never would have to go because the essence of what we were doing was really critical to. The complex of deterrence, the sword of Damocles, if you will, that we talked about, and there's uh, a lot to do there. Now, that doesn't mean we didn't do some stupid things early on. And I was when I was on the air staff in the Pentagon as a young colonel, I got one of the jobs. Because I was in a strategic division, and one of the jobs I had was to go back and read through all of the test reports from the early days of nuclear testing and how we had soldiers standing up outside of trenches facing the site when the nuclear weapon went off and got knocked on their you-know-whats into the trench and all those things. We had to follow up on those cases and how many people might have been destroyed by radiation and everything. I mean, as a country, we were very neophytes in understanding exactly what the effects of that were and the effects of nuclear war. And I mean, it really became apparent. Now, you should know that if the President of the United States has to make a decision to use weapons like that, there are always what's called the consequences of force execution that he has to understand, or he or she, whoever the president might be at a given time, understands that if I do this, this is what happens with respect to what the damage might be, et cetera. And those calculations are something that uh, affect presidents. It affected President Reagan, that's for sure. And in his time, and certainly after the stuff that we did in the intermediate range nuclear forces and what was going on at the time in the INF Treaty and how the Russians perceived us and how we perceived the Russians and the differences in the kind of characteristics of who we're dealing with all contribute to that. I mean, that's not a decision that will be taken lightly. That's for sure.
Yeah, Andrew, I want to take a bit of a transition down a rabbit hole here for just a second and see what General Lord thinks. At the beginning-ish of the Cold War, the early 60s, we thought that the Soviet Union had way more capability and nuclear capacity than they actually did. We tried U-2 flights to validate that. Of course, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis behind that. But at the same time, we were evolving overhead satellite reconnaissance. And that started with the Corona, and it went to I think Gambit, and after that another one. There was a MOL project that was very classified at the time. But what we learned by doing that was that we had way overestimated their capacity, and that overhead satellite presence, which gave birth to Space Command, is what allowed us to really build a credible deterrent capability, not only in terms of our professionalism, the combat arms, the way that we would train and build and employ, we had to, these weapons, but a clear understanding of where we were so that we would go into it with good intelligence, understanding, what was credible, what was threatened, and where we should go next. General, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I do. I think that's great. That's a great way to bring that up, and I think that's important because National Technical Means (NTM), if you to put it that way, the overhead capability to reconnaissance and take a look at. I mean, that was part of the verification schemes for the START treaties, and certainly for things that occurred later on, was to have things in the open so they could be counted and part of the process. But there was a lingering. I mean, it's evolved over time, but as President Reagan said, trust but verify. And I think before Gorbachev and others and before things, I mean, Brezhnev and others before that, back in the early days of the nuclear business, really had different concepts of, who the opponent is and how they think about things. And you're right, how we estimate their capabilities and what that really means for us, and what the opportunities are for us to help shape their force for the future. That was really critical. That was one of the reasons we had the Glickem business, the ground launch cruise missile business in Europe, was because of the INF, business. And then we agreed, and we destroyed more weapons in several years after that than had been created in years, both sides.
This is a good time to get into the INF. So 1976 was those were big years for you. You got a promotion to operations and readiness in the U.S. Air Force headquarters in D.C., but it was also the year the Soviet SS-20 was put into service. Can you talk about your job during this time, what you were up to, and can you also, maybe less related, talk about how big of an impact the SS-20 was in how the Cold War started to play out from 1976 onward?
Well, Ed, I'm sure, has got some inputs from his experiences, certainly, and mine, especially in 1975. I was in the strategic division in the basement of the Pentagon, and that was we were maintaining the day-to-day ICBM. We were providing the resources because the focus of the air staff really is to train, organize, and equip the force, get the right kind of people and resource to the command so that they can actually operate it. And Strategic Air Command, being a specified command, had had to have resources flow to it and be able to do that. But the SS-20 certainly put most of NATO in range, and from the Soviet SS-20 deployment. I really think that in my view, Ed can certainly add or correct me to 100% here, is that that was a coalescing factor, although there were some negatives, as we'll talk about, from some of the deploying countries in the ground launched cruise missile and the Pershing II, or the Pershing 1A and then the Pershing II, in the theater of Europe, because that was a way to make sure the U.S. nuclear guarantee extended to Europe, was with the ground launched cruise missile and the Pershing II.
Yeah, it was just 4 years later that we had a response to the SS-20 threat in terms of a deterrent, as well as a real world tactical capability that had operational and strategic implications. The Pershing II was assigned to the Army, as General Lord said. The Air Force picked up the ground launched cruise missile program, which ironically is a BGM-109 Tomahawk missile that the Army uses today, and that we've been talking about with Ukraine. But they call that system now Typhoon, I believe, is the name of the system. But it's the same missile. It's the same missile that we've been launching from submarines and destroyers. The only difference was to match the SS-20 threat, our ground launched cruise missile at the time that the Air Force was running the program was a nuclear arm.
Gotcha.
It was, and interesting enough, because it was a tactical system, it was handled by Tactical Air Command. It wasn't handled by Strategic Air Command, because the early days of the ground launched cruise missile came out of, at least the organizational piece, came out of Tactical Air Command at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. At TAC and SAC, Strategic Air Command did twos and took care of that, and the Navy did the submarine launched cruise ballistic missiles, and then TAC was the air piece of what was going on in Europe. So it naturally gravitated to them. That's why Ed and I did, I don't know, maybe Ed did, he could opine on this, but I got some bias when they said, okay, what do you want to do next after you got promoted to colonel? I said, I want to go to the ground launched cruise missile office and be part of what's going on in Europe. And they said, you're going to leave the stability of Strategic Air Command. You'll not be part of the future of the business. Am I glad that I did that? Absolutely, yes, I am. I'm glad I went to the ground launched cruise missile office, because that was it was really, really career changer for me. I got to see a bigger part of the world, a bigger part of what we were doing, and how important it was to have the system.
Yeah, I'm sharing.
Oh, great video.
Sharing. I believe this system was called the Griffin at the time, but this is the BGM 109 ground launch cruise missile.
Yeah.
So just kind of some old video of it hiding
Yeah,
out in
I
the
mean,
woods, waiting to strike, covered in camo.
it's still a formidable weapon, and this many decades later. It was pushed the technology to what I think was the end state of the Cold War. It forced a recalculation by the Soviet Union that was part of the process that ended the Cold War with the destruction of the Iron Curtain, the Berlin Wall coming down, the changes in diplomacy and politics.
I agree.
I think it was a formidable threat countering that SS-20, very tactical. And, just like General Lord said, I wanted to go to Glickham as cadre. I was fortunate enough that I was in standardization evaluation at Minot, and my boss there was a lieutenant colonel, had been picked up to go to the cadre program. And about 3 months later, he said, yeah, you need to come over here and help us out. So, I got to transition from a very important strategic deterrent mission, very technically oriented and stress oriented, to do what I wanted to do when I first joined the military, and that is to be a tactical commander of forces and troops and weapon systems that really made a difference. And for me, that's why I joined and why I was really excited when I got selected as cadre to go Glickham.
A very, very capable system. And I remember briefing as the Ground Launch Cruise Missile Program bed down manager. I used to come back to the United States from Europe a couple times a year and brief the Air Force Council, which was the resource allocating body that would approve programs for funding. And then also the Systems Command and the folks at Andrews Air Force Base that had the responsibility of taking those dollars and creating capability out of it, and then sending it to the theater and briefing that 4-star and others. And of course the and in some cases we had to kind of write our own way of doing business because it hadn't been done before. And number two, I worked directly for, through the United States Air Forces Europe, directly for the Department of Defense and the folks in DOD who directed the deployment dates to match our requirements. That they said, okay, we promised NATO that we're going to put these weapon systems, declare initial operation capability on these dates, and we got no relief from those dates because the essence of developing and putting those weapon systems in theater was really critical to bringing the INF Treaty, which was formed on two bases, which was to negotiate while you're deploying and developing capability. You can't do one without the other in this case. And that was, I think that that decision is one of the absolute best that was created in the deterrence world with the former Soviet Union. Because I went back as a retired 4-star and did some stuff with the East-West Institute and went back to meet with the Russians in Moscow and talk to my counterpart, retired 4-stars in Army, retired Army 4-stars in the Russian military. They always said, we knew you wouldn't stop. We knew you'd do what you said you were going to do. Even though we always planned with you, and then we would read your doctrine, and we knew what your doctrine said. But when something happens, you guys don't follow your doctrine. You do whatever you can do right at the way to implement and innovate. We're not that way. We follow our doctrine and follow our dogma and our prescription. They do things by the clock. We don't. We do things when it makes sense to do them, according to the commanders in the field and the commander's intent. So there's a difference. But they said, we respect you for that. I know you respect us for what we did, but there's no reason why we can't agree to be partners in making sure this remains a peaceful business.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I'm sorry, General, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So it was a huge culture shift for the Air Force and for those of us that came from the ICBM field. ICBM's processes were very checklist oriented, very regimented, and there was a portion of the ground launch cruise missile with the launch crew that followed that to some degree, but with a little bit more flexibility. But more importantly, it was a very tactical environment. I had, as a crew commander, a deputy crew commander, one person, shift over to the ground launch cruise missile, and now I'm a captain with about 4 other captains and lieutenants and 400 enlisted people. A total cultural shift, shooting grenade launchers, working claymores, machine guns, carrying a weapon everywhere you went, living and working at night in the worst conditions without any hot food or showers or any of that kind of stuff. Our mentor, Gerald Lohr probably remembers this, him, was Merwin Woolner, Colonel Merwin Woolner. Merwin was a Vietnam veteran. He got shot down once and got out. He crashed once and got out. He E&E'd back to South Vietnam both times, and then went to Army Ranger School, became a ranger, and instilled the same types of disciplines and rigor and physical fitness into the Ground Learners Cruise Missile Force. So compared to ICBMs, this is a huge cultural shift for the Air Force. So the deterrence, I think, not only came from the weapon system and the weapons capability, which is, again, still today phenomenal, but the people and the approach and, the doctrine is there, the, strategy is there, but the people made the difference, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah, you had to resolve your issues in the field. You had to prepare. Plus they didn't train you for, okay, you've got indigenous security forces, plus you've got host nation security forces. So you had 2 cultures that you had to bring together, because the RAF regiment in the UK is different from the gendarmerie in Brussels, and they act differently, and they do things differently. If you ever get invited to a military dinner in Brussels, prepare to stay for about 8 or 9 hours, because that's their culture. It's not like, eating at McDonald's and you're in and out. They don't do things that way. But the culture part of it is something that commanders in the field, people like Ed, at the operational point, really have to blend that together to make the team do its job, because they'll go to practice at certain places to practice, well-known practice points, but their actual deployment, if they have to go to war, is totally unknown to everybody except the people that do the planning inside the classified business, because your location has got to be protected.
So
Quick anecdote.
Go ahead, Ed.
Quick anecdote about that. So I'm a captain, and I'm in the field, I think at Fort Huachuca, with a deployed unit, and 4 nationals that are there, the security forces from another country, which will remain nameless. And the young enlisted security forces folks and others would at night train the 4 nationals and our Americans as well on where to place obstacles to ensure an avenue approach, how to establish the fields of fire, where we would have the observation posts and listening posts, things around a perimeter of a very critical weapon system that would allow us to protect ourselves and maintain the advantage in the event of a tactical engagement. And so my job was to come around when they were done with that, usually around dawn or so, and look at it, assess it, critique it, explain it, and entertain any dialogue. And that was about a 2 or 3 hour evolution as part of the training initiative. As I'm walking away after doing this, a senior NCO and the other country's military force says, where I can hear it as I'm walking away, is, who the hell is that guy thinking he can tell us what to do? And this young 3-star buck sergeant, Air Force buck sergeant, said, that's my captain. And whatever he says we're going to do, that's what we're going to do. And so I'm listening to all this as I'm walking away, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I better not F this up.
That's right.
But as a young Air Force captain, that's the type of culture shift that we had different from the strategic community.
And that model prevails, still does today, and did in the war in Southwest Asia and the deserts and places where we were occupied in Afghanistan and other places, with host nation folks provided for security, as well as indigenous U.S. Security forces. So that's all part of doing the business, and part of what you have to be cognizant of as a leader is to really be able to meld those capabilities together. That doesn't mean you won't go into the RF to the regimental UK security guys in the RAF regiment and drink tea out of their regimental coffee cups and be part of the team. But you got to do what you got to do to make things work. But that to me is a maybe grossly not grossly but overlooked part of what it takes to create the capability. It's in the crucible of combat and how you put that together. That makes the capability really do what it needs to be.
So it was more about the cohesiveness of working with people from other cultures and other nations, and not just the weapon systems and deploying them and knowing how to use them.
Right. And it's the this to me. I mean, I as a commander in Air Force Space Command, after being in the theater, going over and visiting with the folks, being in the Combined Air Operations Center and places in Southwest Asia, then coming back and going to Walter Reed Army Hospital and seeing those young troops who had been grossly wounded. Many have lost limbs and all services, and going in the rooms and talking to the moms and dads and talking to the young people who were, I mean, severely wounded. And they talked to me and looked me in the eye and said, "General, get me out of here. I want to go back to my unit. I want to go back and be with the guys I fought with. That's why I got shot, because I was working with them, and I want to get back there." People, I don't think, really understand the cohesiveness that exists, and a unit to create the combat. That's all part of the profession of arms. Not one of them that I talked to ever said, "I want to go home." It was always, "I want to go back to my unit." In fact, I walked into the orthopedic ward at Walter Reed Hospital, and there was a second lieutenant female from the United States Army who had lost her right leg, and she was in a prosthetic with her gym shoe on the bottom of the prosthetic leg and foot, and she was dribbling a soccer ball, and she shot the soccer ball at me and said, "Hey, General, catch this." Whammo, here comes the ball right at me. And she was there because she wanted to get back to her unit. And almost broken down in tears, because these people are so great. And, that's what it means to be part of the profession.
You got to bring it full circle, Andrew. So we have the SS-20 deployment, and then the Americans come across with this awesome weapon system, cultural shift, on doctrine following combat arms, dedicated, cohesive organizations that integrated the allies, our NATO allies. And that's a part of the calculus they did not consider, I think. And that was really what was forwardable and what was the counter to the SS-20. Eventually, why I say Glickham helped in a very large way bring down the Cold War in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, there was a overhead number called the European troop strength. And you could only have so many because of the DoD laws and what they had put in the forces documents. Was you'd only have so many, military in the theater, and the ground launched cruise missile, Pershing, and all were part of the European troop strengths. And when you take a look at it, I mean, if you wanted to have equivalent capability, without the Glickham, without the Pershing II and stuff, you wanted to match the Soviets on the Fulda Gap outside of being able to come into NATO, you'd had to have a lot more people, and you'd have had to have, probably 4 times what I think the European strict number was, like 375,000. You'd have to check me on that. But anyway, forces in being with the capability we had, and the fact that the Russians knew how, despite what you might have heard from No Crews and kind of the green women who outside the gates, protesting No Crews, why you do this kind of stuff, which I guess is okay and was okay back then, but we had to live through that. But the capability persisted, and we ended up where we are.
So 1983 rolls around. You have the SS-20 happened several years before. The United States deployed the Pershing II and the Ground Launched Cruise Missile System as a counter to it because the SS-20 was solid fueled launch. It could launch quickly. There wasn't time to where you could see it fueling up and interdict it before it was ready to go. So you're out there doing setting up these scenarios and exercises to make sure you're fully prepared and you're demonstrating deterrence to the enemy. But in 1983, Able Archer happened on November 7th and ended November 11th. But the distinct thing about Able Archer in 83 is it almost looked too real of an exercise to the Soviets. And the Soviets countered by going to their full readiness, thinking this was it. The crazy Americans are going to launch, are going to do a decapitation strike or something. So that was a very tense moment during the Cold War. That's maybe a brief summary of Able Archer 83. Where were you guys during Able Archer 83, and what in your mind happened, and how did that influence what would become the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, or was it kind of just another scare? Were those scares becoming too regular? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll start, and then Ed can jump in for sure. I think what it demonstrated was there was a paranoia on the side of the Russians that they didn't really have the kind of intelligence. In fact, I think it was a lieutenant colonel in the Russian warning business who had false identification, or at least he thought it was. Well, he determined it was false and didn't react. He said, "No, that's not a real indicator. They're not really coming." A couple times that called off any kind of retaliatory, response that could have occurred because of a false indication there. So I think it was maybe it was uh, but they didn't really understand on that side, and we didn't really understand how we were communicating. I don't think what our intent was with an exercise like that. I mean, I think it was valid to test your internal workings and do the kind of things, but to your opponent. You have to, or your potential opponent in this case, you have to really be aware of that, which I ended up 79 to 82 in the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon, working for Harold Brown and then Castor Weinberger with doing comparative assessments of U.S. and Russian capabilities on the nuclear balance, as well as some of the other kind of comparative assessments. And it was clear to us that there was no perfect knowledge on either side at that time. What do you think, Ed? I mean, is that right?
So, no, I completely agree. They were quite paranoid, absolutely, and we were, by opposite in an opposite fashion, kind of, complacent. Like we're just doing what we do. I was in Belgium. I was in Glichem. I just got to Glichem a few months, 6 months or 8 months before that, and I was in Belgium, and I was in their current operations center, if you will. Now, Belgium, Florence, is a fighter base, and they had nuclear capacity with the fighters as well back in those days. And so this is an exercise that involves everybody, but it involves everybody in chunks and phases. And I was there to learn some of the command control and how that worked for Europe and NATO. I wasn't part of the exercise at all. And so the reason why there was a lack of communication from my firsthand experience is because we would pause and debrief, go have a few beers, and then, rest it off and start again. Well, we never communicated that, and nobody, I guess, from the Soviet Union saw that, but we were just going through the segments and phases of the war game. It unfortunately got quite misconstrued and miscommunicated, but there was nobody that I knew of that believed that the Soviet Union wouldn't think this wasn't an exercise or a war.
Yeah. I think in retrospect, and I read about that and I understood, but I think it was, I don't know, was it as serious as some people say? Maybe. Was it not as serious? Maybe. It happened. But what it did, it cast a light on how can you really determine your enemy's perceptions, and how do you infect those, and how do you influence them in ways that help you do what you need to do, and convince them that you're not going to do this, you may do something else, which really, I think, opened up the door for a lot of the stuff we're seeing today in terms of how you influence and make a difference in creating perceptions and really understanding. What we found out in my business in the Office of Net Assessment was you can't just take the uh, what do we call it, the status of forces, and you take up how many of these you got and how many of these you got, and then you compare them, and you say it's like looking at the football program and adding up the weights of the players, and then whoever weighs the most is going to win. It doesn't work that way. There's different styles and different strategies, and trying to understand how your opponent sees these kinds of things and what the balance really means to them versus what it means to us, and that's a really, really difficult process. But that's the essence of the intelligence analytics that, space really provides a capability now to help you understand, movements, and these large language models and predictive analytics and left to bang kinds of things are all the vogue these days. But, when it comes right down to it, do you really know what they're thinking? And having studied them for years and years and years, like I said, the U.S. side is more independent, I think more independent operating and creative capabilities, maybe not so much the former Soviet Union and the Russians with respect to their way of doing business. I think we've seen that in some of the Ukraine operations.
So,
Yeah, I spent a lot.
Sticking to the
General,
old doctrine.
at this time during the Cold War, I believe each side had, so was it 70,000 nuclear warheads? It was a large amount. As I understand it, you studied a little bit of the economics of this and comparing forces. Was this was the strategic nuclear forces and nuclear command a big drain on both the Soviet Union and the United States? And do you think this contributed to the treaties that happened? Or do you think it was more some of the close calls, the Able Archer 83s, some of the scares that happened that ultimately led Reagan to sign the INF Treaty and go through with the START Treaty and some of these more stabilizing treaties?
I think it was both. Really, it was not only an economic argument because the force exchange ratio and stuff. I mean, those are considerations. Way to use $100 million missile to kill a $2 million target. I mean, you'd have to think about that kind of stuff. But that economics there. But I think understanding your opponent and that. In fact, we did lots of analyses on the economic costs of this. I was one of the principal architects of what they called the military investment balance, and really trying to determine what the actual cost to the Russians was, how much it cost them in their terms of their economics, and they didn't have a gross, they didn't have a GNP, but they had their equivalent of a gross national product, and how much of what was the burden of defense on the former Soviet Union. And what we did was what we call dollar cost averaging. You could not create because the ruble was not a hard currency, you could not really say, okay, what would be the exchange if a SS-20 cost 150 rubles? What would the dollar equivalent be to that? You couldn't do that. What you had to do is you had to say what would it cost in dollars to manufacture the SS-20, and then we could get a real comparison. So we did the military investment balance. We did a lot of looking at this. And we found out that, at least it was generally accepted, that the burden of defense of the Soviet economy to develop this military capability that they had as large as it was more like 15 or 16% of the gross national product, not 3 or 5%. That's
Mhm.
a significant difference in what the U.S. was spending,
Mhm.
which gave rise to what I think President Reagan and then as followed was what was called back then the cost imposing strategy. If we develop more sophisticated weapons, that the cost of defending it would be more on the defense, on the burden of defense on the Russians, which really gave I think impetus to the dissolution of the former Soviet Union. And I mean, just economically they couldn't compete. So
Yeah, I
that's my
think
story. that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
On the operational side of it, the tactical side of it, one of the tactical initiatives that we try to practice is to complicate the enemy's order of battle. Their assessment of what we have and what our threat is, and you can see that even today in the Ukraine. Russia launches a ton of drones, 100 drones or whatever, but they don't all have warheads, right? It complicates the order of battle then for the Ukrainians. They got to shoot them all down to be sure they get the right one. When we start multiplying the combat capability of the United States against the Soviet Union, whether it's actual assets, more Tomahawks, or just the American soldiers and warfighting perspective of, we're going to get this done no matter what, it complicates the order about how do you contend with that? How do you deal with that? And how do you press forward with that? So in terms of numbers, General Lord's spot on. The intangible there is hard to calculate from the point of military deception, information warfare, all the other aspects of the principles of war and the tactics and strategy, operational argument strategy that we use to implement those. Those are part of the calculation the enemy has to consider.
Yeah, I think that that's made a big difference. And my visits to Moscow with through the East West Institute, and we actually proposed let's do because there was a time, remember, when after the SS-20 and etc., that we were going to, and the interesting part of this is missile defense and how you develop missile defense capability, indigenous in the theater in Europe, put in Poland and what others. And we got together with, of course, the initial reaction from the Russians was, "Oh, you can't do that. You're really on tipping to."
That regards the anti-ballistic missile treaty, the ABM treaty.
Yeah, anti-ballistic missile system, and put it in Europe. And we said, okay, well, let's form a joint task force to take a look at this. What does it really tell? Does it really? What's the warning characteristics, etc.? That never got anywhere because it was too politically sensitive to really make a legitimate run at that with respect to comparing military capabilities in the theater, which was the way I thought, and our proposal was to help take the temperature down, as opposed to, if we would share missile warning information with the Russians, and we'd be able to, have a more mutual kind of capability to, put the horrors of war at rest there.
Absolutely. So what do you think in the media today is the risk of nuclear war and what's going on in the world with strategic nuclear stockpiles, the death of the ABM treaty, the death of the INF treaty, the maybe death in February of the START treaty? Do you think that this gets enough media coverage? Do you think people have enough of a perception of what's going on nowadays? What lessons can we learn from those times during the Cold War for today?
I think that the hardest part of all this is not necessarily the weapons. It's really how does your opponent think about this, and how do we think about it, and how do we affect and influence their thoughts and process? We're seeing this playing out in a little minor way, not a minor way, but certainly if you're Zelensky and you're worried about what's going to happen with respect to the Russian kinds of attacks against your country, and what you're doing there. The threat of using tomahawks, or everything. Okay, then what happens next? In that theater is really really weighs heavy on everybody. Then what happens as a result of that, and what the perceptions are. And every time we've done something like that, or things like that have done, the retort back from this occurred all the way through the ICBM era, and the SS-20 and the INF and everything was, we think you're cheating, and you're doing more than you said you were going to do, and we'll respond in kind. And those kind of arguments kind of fade away as they take a look at what's really going on operationally, and what's happening, and how that works. So my view is the more you can learn who your opponent is and how they think about this, I think there's a way to the future without having to deploy those weapons. But that's that requires some real diplomacy and a real capability. And Zelensky's between a rock and a hard place for sure right now, and how we unwind that without giving away some hard fought territory. And the fact that the Russians have lost almost 1 million casualties in this war, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's wild. Speaking of, since, we were talking about tomahawks and the Russia-Ukraine, that might as well touch on a topic that's been on the news lately, is the idea of deploying tomahawks to Ukraine. I was wondering, how would that even be done? Because as I understand it, the platforms, the land-based platforms, were destroyed during the INF Treaty, and the only platforms that exist were aircraft, large aircraft, I believe. I don't know if they fit on small. Tomahawks can be fired from smaller aircraft, but I know B-52s and strategic bombers can carry them, and ships. So I failed to understand, in the media, how that would even function. Was that just political bluff nonsense, and just talk, or was there actually some practicality to it?
The Army has a new system called Typhoon. You might want to Google that real quick. It is the Tomahawk missile launched from a container-like canister that has 4 Tomahawks in it. It's not as sophisticated. It's to my knowledge, not nuclear capable. It raises straight up, pops it on out. It's basically taking what used to be on a ship, or still is on a ship, and sticking it on land, erecting it, and then firing off the Tomahawks. It has a range over 1,500 nautical miles.
It still uses Turcom guidance, right, Ed?
It does. I believe it, and I believe they've augmented it with GPS.
Yeah,
but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah.
So I shared a screen share of the U.S. Army's Typhon system. I guess it's Typhon. They spelled it Typhon, Typhoon. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably Typhoon.
S-6 with Tomahawk missile. Yeah. You said those were not nuclear capable.
I don't know that firsthand, but I would imagine they are not. There's not the infrastructure that goes with it to indicate that there would be any nuclear capability on it. As far as a title, Typhoon, that might be a poke in the eye of the Navy. I don't know, but yeah, that's a system.
So I guess my question would be, how would the Russians even know if it's nuclear capable or not, especially if one is flying towards Moscow?
I mean, that's a great point. We don't. There is nothing there to show that there is a nuclear capability for this missile, but at the end of the day, you don't know what's inside of any bomb, no matter what it is.
Right.
So how far do you want to extend that argument?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. These are the tough questions. I'll stop sharing that.
I mean, you can get into a very sophisticated argument quickly about this with respect to arming and fusing of something beyond the high explosives with respect to a nuclear weapon. I mean, how that occurs and flight dynamics and all that stuff that's esoteric, black world kinds of stuff. So, I mean, how you determine that, what the flight profiles are, and all that are something that I have no knowledge of. I don't think you do either, do you, Ed?
No.
So it's not as simple as taking off the regular warhead and then screwing on the nuclear warhead and you're good to go. There's a lot more to it.
Oh, there is, very much so. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the nuclear payload of the old BGM-109 Glickums, but very different.
Now, if you're sitting there and you're seeing it coming at you, how do you decide? Well,
that's right.
Yeah,
and there are hard missile detectors shoot down too. I mean, they're flying nap in the air 550 knots, and they're just screaming. So you'll see them for just a fraction of a second as they go by. If you're lucky, you won't hear them coming, and you're having a hell of a time shooting them down at that altitude.
Oh, how high did you say they fly off the ground? Are they ground terrain hugging?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best place to be when something like that happens is where you could say, "What was that?"
Yeah. And Andrew, I answered that question affirmatively. I honestly don't know the performance specifications of that missile. I've been told that they are, but and I know what the Glickums were. It's basically BGM-109 Tomahawk missiles. So I would imagine that we would not run away from that they'd be very close to the surface.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no insight into that. I do know that, at least from the press and what we reported, that Mr. Putin certainly respects their capability.
Mm-hmm. But, Andrew, let me back up for just a second to your previous question about the populace and understanding the implications of potential nuclear war again, Cold War arising.
Yeah.
There are more nuclear powers than just us and Russia, obviously, right? And there's China, North Korea, others. And so what I struggle with when I talk about this and think about this with others is what's the red line threshold? Let's say North Korea example. We're very comfortable. I'm going to transition to a lot of things, jump around a little bit here. We're very comfortable with our internet capability, the virtual podcast work we're doing right now, for example. But most of the internet traffic in the world, especially outside of the continental United States, is run by undersea cabling, about 96%, I would say. Most of it, not by satellites. So we have a state out in the Pacific, and Hawaii is out there. They had a false alarm a few years back of a potential ballistic attack.
Oh yes, from North Korea. Yes,
from North Korea. So let's just say that the North Koreans aren't too sure they can hit anything or not, but they know they can launch something up, out of atmosphere in a ballistic profile, and they detonate a nuclear weapon there over top of or in the vicinity of over top of the state of Hawaii, and it goes dark, right? There's no direct casualties from a kinetic attack. There's probably some casualties from accidents and incidents. That type of trigger, what type of response would the United States have? How would the American population look at that? How would the state of Hawaii react? I mean, what would we do there? Was it actually a nuclear attack? What would we do from a diplomatic point of view? What would we do from a retaliatory point of view? Does it build a new American mindset toward a new Cold War? Those are the questions that I think are worth a lot of dialogue that we don't pay a lot of attention to. We are not nuclear hardened from an EMP nowadays.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or a solar flare for that matter, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I was engaged in the early days of an assessment after I retired of just what you talked about, Ed, with respect to, okay, here's a list of the nuclear powers. It's just not U.S. and Russia, China, Korea, and then the list goes on. What does deterrence look like with these players as opposed to the way it was, 50 years ago? What does it look like? How do you manage it? Who plays? Who doesn't play? What's the I know there are a lot of people that are worrying that problem right now because it's not just the U.S. and Russia. Or the U.S. and China and Russia, and this goes back to the discussions that we had with in the late 70s with respect to Henry Kissinger and talking about linkage with nuclear deterrence and linking it to other things as well, and be able to say, okay, if we have this agreement with Russia in terms of nuclear deterrence, we could link and we could maybe help that use us to solve some of the problems in the Middle East and other places. The linkage strategy. It really never, even though Henry Kissinger was probably one of the best at thinking about those kinds of things, and President Nixon before that already thought that he was the real brains behind all this, and all that goes on, and what happens as a result of it, that the linkage issue never really came about how you really link those together. So do we need as a nation to get back into with our best brains and minds to think about this multi-polar nuclear world as opposed to the bipolar aspects of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the 2000s up to date? Yeah, different question.
I think an example of a deterrent that we just saw that is non-nuclear is Midnight Hammer. I mean, Talcum Maverick, that makes for some great video, right? 10 Gs, fall upside down. Everybody's shooting at each other. You're trying to aim it down the hole. But the Air Forces and all the services that participate in the Navy too, execution of Midnight Hammer and the attack of the nuclear facilities at Iran was so precise, so well coordinated, full of perfect command and control, of professionalism from drills and training that all of our professionals in the service do all the time have proven that that could have been a nuke. It didn't have to be just a big old bomb, and nobody knew it was coming until it was gone. That in itself is an example of military might in the United States that I think adds to the calculus of deterrence.
Right. There's a time when we looked at zero CEP, circular error probable. If you could have zero CEP and you could assure yourself you could hit a pinpoint target, you wouldn't need a nuclear weapon. You could do it with high explosives if you could do that, and having no error in that. And I think you're right, Ed. I think that raised the question about, you know, what's the real that's effective precision application of military force.
And that's a V2. That's a 20-year-old weapon system, not the B-21, not the other classified systems that we have now.
And by the way,
I actually have something on the Minuteman. The Minuteman 1, the circular error, the CEP, the circular error probability, how likely it is to land in a circle within that area. So the Minuteman 1 was 2 kilometers, and then the Minuteman 2 was 0.48 kilometers, and then the Minuteman 3 is 660 feet. So how did that change in precision, the precision revolution, if you will, to maybe how many nuclear weapons you needed? How did it change your guys' job?
I mean, in terms of keeping the capability together, it wasn't. I mean, that was a technical advantage that occurred as a result of the increased capability of the guidance and control systems and the weapon system, and the capability to, one, understand where it was, number two, where it's going, and what the precision of the accelerometers, the calculations of. I mean, I went through a whole lot of this stuff with and the Joint Strategic Capabilities Plan, which says this is what you need to achieve to create the damage that's required to achieve the objectives of the deployment of the force, is all a factor of launch reliability, weapons accuracy, and probability of hitting the target. And they planned this. The B2 is probably the best example of how this is all brought together in terms of precision application. And we found out with GPS, and that was the real knowing where you are and where you're going to go and what the aspects are, the precision application of military capabilities. And it's really the revolution of military affairs that occurred in the last 20-some years.
I think what it allowed us to do, Andrew, is it allowed us to cover more targets. As you have more precision and the CEP gets smaller, you need less warhead. And that's explosive capability. When you reduce the size of the weight of the warhead and everything around it, you still have the same rocket, right? So now you could put 3 of them on a Minuteman 3 or 10 of them on a Peacekeeper or whatever the numbers are. Pretty easy maths. As you reduce the capability and you build the accuracy, like General Lord said, with the accelerometers and so forth, you reduce the size of the weapon. You put more weapons on a rocket. You can cover more targets. Or conversely, you need less rockets, and you can keep the spares, and you don't have to rebuild them. You just got a stockpile. So I think that is part of the value of the technology change.
Absolutely. That was a great
Because
answer.
you demonstrated, I mean, that's why we do the Minuteman ICBM tests, to create, to calculate the circular error probable of the weapon system. He knows what the target is, and what happens. What you do is you create this, you don't want to hear all this, but I'll tell you anyway.
Yeah, do it. Go for it.
You know what the target is. Let's say it's in Kwajalein. It's A22 is the target. Let's just pick a number. And okay, that's where you're shooting for, right? With your weapon. And what you do is you know what that target is, and then you launch 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 14 Minuteman through the test program. And what you do is you create what's called a circular error probable about the mean point of impact. So you see where all 16 of those land, and you create a CEP is 50% in, 50% out. So you know what the circular error probable is, and then you know what the circular error probable is for the target. And the difference between those two, and there are a difference because there's no perfect weapon system yet. Maybe B2 is getting absolutely damn close. But that's the weapon system bias. There's a bias in every weapon system because it's not perfect. So that's why you might, in some circumstances, have to employ 2 weapons as opposed to 1 because you're not sure the first one's going to get it. In this case, they did 2, and they both went in the same hole.
Beautiful and beautiful explanation. Absolutely. So, General, you were talking about the craziness of the fall of the INF treaties, all these treaties going down, and the destabilization. You said a multipolar nuclear world where there's a lot of, you've got India and Pakistan and Iran possibly, and Israel, and all these different nuclear powers now, China, North Korea. It's a much crazier world. So how do you think diplomacy and overhead surveillance, satellites, ISR can contribute to making the world a little more of a stable place?
Well, I think that's important. Diplomacy certainly is an important piece, but the national technical means and the capability to do large language modeling and knowing what your opponent thinks and how they react, et cetera, to give you a left of event kind of warning, those kinds of things are really, I think, really help and be able to predict what others might do in certain circumstances. We did that with Soleimani when he was killed. When we went after him, President Trump said, let's get this guy. We got Soleimani. But we had done a lot of large language modeling under Project Sentinel to take a look at what the Iranians might do as a result of that. So we saw some of the early indicators. We predicted that they would launch within a certain number time frame. So we were able to warn our troops in the area to be cognizant. They backed off, and as a result, we had some damage, but not deaths as a result of that. So the combination of diplomacy and the capability of AI and large language modeling, and as long as we're sampling the right kind of things and focusing our exquisite intelligence, and Ed knows more about this than I do, I think, from the practical applications of it, the better off we're able to then, I think, be able to say to a particular opponent that if it comes to this through diplomacy or whatever, or even a phone call from the President of the United States, we know what you're going to do. And we know when you're going to do it. And we know you've already started the process. So don't take another step.
Yeah, Andrew,
I mean, that's
that's
hypothetical for me. It's not, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but, that's the way I kind of would approach it.
spot on, Lance. My thoughts to expand upon that for you and the audience a little bit is to not just think nuclear, not just think space, add cyber to that, add the AI piece to that, right? The unknown. An old example now, it's got to be at least 15 years old, is Stuxnet, right? When the viruses were put into that Iranian accelerators.
The centrifuges, their nuclear facility?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's one obvious and historical example. We've evolved way beyond that in terms of technology and the cyber side and the AI side as well today. So if you think of the cyber piece of this, and you think of space as something that really has a huge cyber component, you think of nuclear warfare, misdirection, all the things that cyber can cause. It has to be part of, I think, the deterrent calculation and the value that our systems bring from a deterrent point of view. We always want to try to do the best we can left of boom, left of launch, left of whatever, so that the war does not occur, that nuclear explosion does not occur. So how do you make that glitch happen? How do you make something happen like what AWS just experienced on the East Coast? And what is the enemy's Achilles heel in their AWS equivalent in China, North Korea, Russia, wherever? And so it's not just the nuke, right? It's the full spectrum of non-kinetic capability, as we call it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we found out as a result of Mossad and Shin Bet doing the little bomb inside the pager.
Yeah.
I mean, that's nasty stuff. But you have to think nasty about this to be able to get left of the event in a way that you can shape your opponent to do things that you want them to do, not what you don't want them to do, and
Hmm.
kind of guide and direct. That's pretty sophisticated stuff, and it requires a lot of computational capability and intelligence collection and thinking critically about this, which I would argue that that's AI uh, growth business for the future.
It's pretty wild. So one of the last few questions I had is, how has the U.S. nuclear doctrine changed over the years? And do you think it's too aggressive, not aggressive enough? Does it cover all the scenarios that maybe would keep you awake at night or your colleagues?
No. I have to, say I followed this for a while, but since I've been out of the business, I'm not current on what the latest nuclear weapons employment policy and the framework and the outlines of that. I go back to what we call the strategic integrated operational plan, the SIOP, and the things related to the retaliation capabilities of the U.S. But I know there's sophisticated studies going on now, and I just like competent to talk about the current employment policies. It's all about how does that back up your uh, your what you say and what you do and how you think about this from the president on down with respect to the capability. It's an extent possibility. I mean, we have the nuclear weapons, we have the capability, we have the command, U.S. Strategic Command, we have all the pieces and parts. But I'm not confident. Ed may be able to shed a little more light on it, but I can't tell you how that's coming together.
Yeah,
Apologize,
Andrew,
but I just
I'm not current on doctrine either. At nuclear doctrine, tactical and normal strategic warfare, I
Hmm.
kind of keep up with that. But from an opinion point of view, we just need to keep the pedal down at a decent pace, right? We don't need to go fast or stop at all. And what I mean by that is as we look to replenish and replace the Minuteman ICBM system or our nuclear submarine capability, and not only nuclear in terms of power, but nuclear in terms of ballistic missile and cruise missile capability, our bomber force, the continued drills and training with our F-35s now, and of course the bombers that we have. I think just keeping a steady course on that maintains a credible deterrent. We can't let that become obsolete. We can't let it get stale. We can't let our folks become so complacent from lack of training that we don't understand it. We just need to cover it all and be ready.
I wrote a piece back and co-wrote a piece back in 1982 about beyond the missile age. It was one of the co-authors with a guy named Barry Watts. We were both in the Office of Net Assessment at the time, and we parted ways at chapter 5 because he left, I left. I went on to be what I was going to be, and he went on back. But one of the chapters we haven't written yet, which I still have notes on, was we hope that to move to the space age and really get involved in the space business in a way that we could move this competition between the U.S. and the former Soviet Union and all the others to space, as opposed to keeping it earthbound, and move this competition out there and really focus on competing in space to space in a way that avoids us fouling the nest, so to speak, with nuclear weapons. So let's face each other in space in a way that changes the whole offense defense dynamic in a way that's totally different than what we had in the day-to-day business. So that was chapter 6, which we never wrote, but that was the
Wow.
essence of that. That was the essence of that. Got laughed at by others when we talked about it. But if you stop and think about it, what we've never done, and really in a serious way, I don't think, is that we have never focused. Now we're doing this a little bit in space. But we really got to do it in space as it relates to the employment of forces on on the Earth. Is really the offense-defensive dynamic. I mean, you do this offensively, we do this defensively. You do this offensively, we do this defensively, and continue to move in a way that challenges each other to continue to exploit the capability. So, I mean, I'm not commercializing that or advertising that for anything. I just want to say I think it may be one of the ways to unwind this and get us out of this Gordian knot, if you will, about what we have to do in the future.
It's a beautiful concept. It's a beautiful concept.
That's all I got.
Well, I think this is a good time to end the recording, but thank you everybody for watching. If you like it, subscribe, follow, and keep an eye on us, the Edge of Deterrence. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Lance, so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time for another episode.